What if the best deal your grandfather ever got was a deal that was never meant for you? Not because you did something wrong, not because you were lazy or careless or made bad choices, but because the whole thing, the pension, the gold watch, the 30 years and out, the house paid off, the fishing on Sundays, all of it was a historical accident. A one-time window that opened for about 40 years and then quietly, without ceremony, closed forever. And almost nobody told you. That is the hidden truth at the center of the story. Retirement, as most people understand it today, as something you are owed, something you earn by working long enough, something the system will provide, that version of retirement is a lie. Not a conspiracy, not a plot. Just a lie the culture kept telling long after the conditions that made it possible had already died. And the cruelest part is that millions of people are still making life decisions based on a map of a country that no longer exists. So let's go back, all the way back. Because to understand how you got played, you have to understand the original game. Picture a man. Call him Walter. It is 1953. Walter is 41 years old. He works at a steel mill in Pittsburgh. He has worked there since he was 22. His hands are permanently gray from the metal dust. He wakes up at 5 in the morning 6 days a week. He does not love the work. He does not even like it. But he does not need to love it, because there is a promise attached to it, a real promise. The kind written on paper and backed by a company that has been operating for 60 years and expects to operate for 60 more. The promise is simple. Stay loyal, don't cause trouble, and when you turn 65, we will take care of you. You will receive a monthly check until you die. Your wife will receive it too, if she outlives you. You will not have to think about money again. Walter believes this. He has no reason not to. His father believed the same thing and it worked out fine. His neighbors believe it. His union believes it and fights for it. The whole post-war American economy is built on this understanding, this quiet contract between labor and capital that says, your best years belong to us, and in exchange, your last years belong to you. This was not charity. This was not generosity. This was a specific historical response to a specific historical terror. That terror had a name, the Great Depression. And if you want to understand why retirement was invented the way it was, you have to sit inside that terror for a moment. You have to feel what it did to a generation. By 1933, nearly 1/4 of the American workforce had no job. Not a bad job, not a low-paying job, no job at all. Men who had spent 20 years building a trade, men who had done everything right, stood in bread lines stretching 4 city blocks. They sold apples on street corners. They lost their homes. They watched their children go hungry. And the ones who were old, the ones who had already spent their best working years and had nothing left to give, they had absolutely nothing to fall back on. No savings, because the banks had failed. No pension, because most companies had none. No government support, because Social Security did not yet exist. They were simply discarded. That image, the old man with nothing, burned itself into the American psyche in a way that is almost impossible to overstate. An entire generation looked at their parents and grandparents starving in old age and made a collective decision. This cannot happen again. We will build a floor. We will make sure that the act of working a lifetime means something. We will create a system where age is not a death sentence. And so they built it. Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act in 1935. It was imperfect from the start. excluding domestic workers and farm laborers, which in practice meant it excluded most black workers, a compromise made to get Southern Democrats on board. But the principle was real. The principle was radical. The idea that a modern industrial society has a responsibility to its aging workers was genuinely new. It had never been the default assumption of any economy at any point in human history before that moment. Then came the war. World War II reshuffled the entire economic deck in ways people still do not fully appreciate. Suddenly, the factories were running around the clock. Every able-bodied worker was needed. And because the government had put wage controls in place to fight inflation, companies could not compete for workers by offering more money. So they offered something else: benefits, health insurance, and pensions. The pension became the great recruitment tool of the American industrial economy. Companies built pension systems not out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they needed workers and they needed to keep them. The result, completely unintentional, was the most financially secure working class in the history of the world. This is the part nobody talks about. The retirement paradise your grandfather inhabited was not the natural result of capitalism working properly. It was the accidental byproduct of wage controls, union pressure, post-war economic dominance, and a geopolitical situation so unusual it will almost certainly never be repeated. The United States, after 1945, was the only major industrial economy in the world that had not been bombed into rubble. Europe was shattered. Japan was shattered. China was in the middle of a civil war. The Soviet Union had lost 27 million people. America had its factories, its infrastructure, its workforce, and no competition. The entire global economy needed American goods. American workers could demand almost anything, and they got it. For roughly 25 years, from the late 1940s to the early 1970s, the deal held. The middle class expanded at a rate never seen before or since. Wages rose steadily. Unions were strong. Pensions were real and funded. A factory worker could, on a single income, own a house, raise 3 kids, take a vacation every summer, and retire at 65 with enough money to live comfortably until he died. This was not a dream. This was Tuesday. And then, quietly, the ground shifted. It did not happen all at once. The great unraveling of retirement was not a single event you can point to on a calendar. It was more like a slow leak in a roof. For years, everything looks fine from the inside. Then one morning, you wake up and the ceiling is on the floor. The first crack appeared in the early 1970s. The post-war economic dominance was ending. Germany had rebuilt. Japan had rebuilt. And they were building things cheaper and often better than American factories could. The trade surplus evaporated. Companies started feeling real pressure on their profit margins for the first time in a generation. And pension obligations, those solemn promises made during the fat years, started looking like very expensive liabilities. Here is something important to understand about a pension. When a company promises you a monthly check for life starting at 65, they are making a bet on the future. They are betting they will still exist in 30 years. They are betting the economy will be stable enough to fund the promise. They are betting their workforce demographics will remain healthy, meaning enough young workers paying in to support the retired ones. In good times, this bet seems almost impossible to lose. In bad times, it becomes a trap. The 1970s were bad times. Inflation exploded. The stock market was stagnant for most of the decade. Companies were bleeding. And the pension funds, which were supposed to be carefully managed, pools of money set aside for future retirees, were often nothing of the sort. Some were underfunded from the start. Some were looted, not always illegally, just quietly drained through accounting decisions that prioritized today's earnings over tomorrow's obligations. Some simply collapsed when the companies that backed them went under. In 1974, Congress passed a law called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. The official story is that this was a protection for workers, a guarantee that pension funds had to be properly managed. And in some ways, it was. But it also opened a door that would eventually replace the pension almost entirely. That door had a number. The number was 401k. The 401k was originally a small loophole in the tax code, a tiny provision added in 1978 that allowed executives to defer some of their compensation and avoid taxes on it. That was it. Nobody intended it to become the foundation of American retirement. It was not designed for factory workers or teachers or nurses. It was designed for corporate executives who wanted to shelter a bonus. But then, in 1981, a benefits consultant named Ted Bana noticed this little provision and had an idea. What if companies used it to create savings plans for all their employees? You contribute a portion of your paycheck before taxes. The company matches some of it. You invest it in the market. And when you retire, you have whatever you have. The corporate world embraced this idea with a speed that should have raised questions. Within a decade, major employers were systematically replacing their pension programs with 401k plans. By the 1990s, the shift was nearly complete in the private sector, and the language used to sell this switch was masterful. They called it empowerment. They said workers were now in control of their own futures. They said you were no longer dependent on a company or a government. You were free. You were your own financial manager. You had options. What they did not say, what the brochures never mentioned, was that this freedom came with a transfer of risk so enormous it amounted to a fundamental rewriting of the social contract. Under a pension, the risk lived with the institution. If the market crashed the year you were supposed to retire, that was the company's problem. Under a 401k, the risk lived with you. If the market crashed the year you were supposed to retire, that was your problem. Your problem entirely. Welcome to freedom. And the market did crash. It crashed in 2001. It crashed catastrophically in 2008. People who had spent 30 years carefully doing what they were told, contributing to their plans, being responsible, watched half their retirement savings evaporate in 18 months. Except they were not 18-year-olds with time to recover. Many of them were 58, 61. They had no time. They had no floor to fall back on. The pension that would have protected them had been quietly traded away a decade earlier, and most of them had not fully understood the terms of the trade when they made it. This is the villain of this story. But the villain is not a person. It is not a single company, or a single law, or a single president. The villain is a system that figured out how to take a concrete promise, the pension, and replace it with an abstract hope, the market, and convince you that the swap was an upgrade. The villain is the slow, methodical transfer of risk from institutions that could absorb it down to individuals who cannot. And then the system put one more burden on top. It told you that if you failed, if you hit 65 and did not have enough, it was your fault. You should have started earlier. You should have contributed more. You should have picked better funds. You should have read the fine print. The culture built an entire language of personal financial responsibility that placed the entire weight of a structural failure on individual shoulders. You did not fail the system. The system is working perfectly. You failed yourself. That is the most sophisticated manipulation in the whole story, because it contains just enough truth to sting. Yes, personal choices matter. Yes, starting early helps. Yes, some people do build meaningful security through discipline and smart investing. But the narrative of pure personal responsibility was designed specifically to protect the system from examination. As long as you are blaming yourself, you are not asking why the floor was removed. As long as you are buying another course on passive income, you are not asking who decided that a guaranteed pension was too expensive to honor. So where does that leave you now? Sitting in the wreckage of a promise that was made to a different generation under conditions that no longer exist, trying to build security with tools that were designed to benefit institutions more than people. What is the honest answer? The honest answer is uncomfortable. The honest answer is that for most people, the retirement your grandparents had is not coming back. It is not a political problem you can vote away. It is not a financial problem you can save your way out of. It is a structural reality. The conditions that created the golden era, post-war dominance, strong unions, defined benefit pensions, a single-income middle-class household, are gone. You are not living in that world. You are living in the world that replaced it. But here's the thing about understanding how the trap works. Once you see it clearly, you stop spending your life trying to spring it and start asking different questions entirely. The first different question is this: what are you actually trying to buy when you say you want to retire? Most people, if you press them, are not trying to buy idleness. They are not trying to buy 30 years of golf. What they are trying to buy is freedom from financial fear. The ability to wake up in the morning and not have the first thought in their head be about money. The ability to make choices based on what they value, not what they can afford. That is the real purchase. And that purchase does not require a specific account balance. It requires a specific relationship with your expenses and your time. This is where the script flips. Because the golden era pension did not actually give workers freedom from financial fear. It gave them a delayed promise of it. Work 40 years in fear of losing your job, fear of the company folding, fear of your union losing leverage, and then, if everything goes right, get a few years of peace at the end. That was the deal. The work happened now. The reward happened later, maybe. What a growing number of people are discovering is that the math of modern life actually permits a different architecture. Not the 4% withdrawal rate and the $1 million in a brokerage account, though that path still works for those who can reach it. Something more fundamental. A deliberate, intentional reduction in the cost of your life, combined with a deliberate, intentional increase in the value of your time. Not because you are poor, because you have decided that the transaction your grandparents made, your best years for a promise of ease at the end, is a bad trade. This is not a new idea. The Stoics practiced it 2,000 years ago. Seneca wrote letters about it from Rome while the empire rotted around him. The idea is simply this: the person who needs less is freer than the person who earns more. Security does not come from accumulation alone. It comes from the gap between what you need and what you have. Widen that gap, and you are free, regardless of what the market does. Narrow it, and you are a hostage to every economic tremor, every policy change, every corporate decision made by someone who has never heard your name. The practical shape of this philosophy looks different for everyone. For some, it looks like dramatically downsizing a home and eliminating the mortgage that was supposed to be the foundation of stability but turned out to be the chain around the ankle. For some, it looks like building one skill that can generate income independently of any single employer. For some, it means moving to a city or a country where the cost of a dignified life is a fraction of what it is in the expensive markets where most of this documentary's viewers live. For some, it simply means the radical act of deciding that the consumer identity, the newer car, the bigger kitchen, the subscription to everything, is a trap disguised as a reward. None of this is easy. All of it requires rejecting messages that have been aimed at you since childhood. The message that says your worth is in your output. The message that says comfort is something you earn after suffering. The message that says the future will take care of itself if you just follow the standard path. The standard path was designed for a different world. You are not obligated to walk it. Walter from Pittsburgh is gone now. His steel mill is a shopping mall. His pension fund, one of the survivors, pays out to a shrinking pool of retirees whose numbers decrease every year. His grandchildren are in the gig economy, managing their own taxes, carrying no benefits, told to be grateful for the flexibility. The gold watch is a meme. The 30 years and out is a punchline. The golden years were real. For one generation, in one country, under conditions that will not return, the deal held. It was not designed for you. It was not taken from you by a single villain. It was the product of a specific historical moment, and that moment passed. What you do with that truth is the only question that matters. You can spend your life mourning a promise that was never made to you. You can chase the old map through a landscape that has completely changed. Or you can look at the terrain as it actually is, build accordingly, and find a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of the gold watch, not the freedom of the pension check. The freedom of someone who looked at the system clearly, understood the game, and decided to play a different one entirely. That is the only retirement that is not a lie.